G'day everyone, this is Rangadad. Not financial advice, just the way I'm looking at the market. Sorry I didn't get to do a video yesterday. I had a date with the golf course. Yeah, we finally got that sell-off, but the rebound on the same day was a little unexpected, and it got to be a bit careful where it's at the moment too. So, advanced decline line on general stocks, and I'm actually going to focus on the general stock market at the moment because it's probably more important than Bitcoin itself in terms of governing which way Bitcoin's going to go. Despite all odds, we did actually still peak, and we peaked slightly higher than the previous peak on the advanced decline. Now, if we hadn't have made a newer high, that would have been a little bit more concerning. Like this sort of thing here, you tend to go down and keep going down. Could we still be doing that? Yes, of course, but there's just something going on where I've got a feeling that markets are actually going to go up before they come down again. Now, could be completely wrong on that. That's why I do these things. So by the end of this, I'll summarize what I come up with. But so you could just skip through to the end if you're watching this on replay, because I may change my mind once I look at the data. So yeah, look, advanced decline line is looking relatively bullish still. Little blips like that aren't a huge deal. It's more once we start crossing these moving averages that I get a little bit more worried. But yeah, like a day of down yesterday hasn't actually, sorry, that's today US time, isn't it? No, it's not. That's my time. So yeah, when we get the read today, it'll be interesting to see if it's kept coming down or not. It has been a pretty green day across the board on the main big guys, S&P 500 and the Nasdaq. But yeah, it's obviously not as big a volume as this particular week, but the reason why I'm suggesting there may be more upside before we come down, it's just one, we got that gap there. I guess the argument against that is we need to reclaim this trend line here. That's been a reasonable trend line. But after seeing the buy up off the bottom here, and this bottom came in so close to that trend line there as a retest, like that's a massive buy up. And there was a big dark pool transaction right at the bottom there. So, and we are still in the bullish control zone as well. Make no mistake, we will come back into that. But when you look at options expiries and stuff like that, the market will want to stay up around this area. It's just whether it can sustain it or not. I guess one of the good things to look at, when that freaking Let's just zoom in there. Okay, so one of the things we've been watching is this trend line. Depending on where you put this makes it very, very interesting. Given that was like a flash crash, you could even put it in there. But I guess the point is we're really testing this trend line again, whether it's we've bounced off it. There is a case for drawing this trend line in a way where you could say, okay, we've bounced off it and we're rejecting it. Or you could say, okay, we're just retesting it, depending on how you want to draw it. So I wouldn't say this is a fantastic read, but maybe actually, because this is a funny scale, let's look at it on here itself. See, this looks a bit different. I think given that is a flash, you're probably better off going here. I mean, that would suggest that we're actually above it. We look at this one here. It's actually not a lot to go off there, but then you're kind of below that if you take that one. So I would actually think that this first one is the more important trend line there. On this is global liquidity that I'm looking at. Yeah, it's not a bad situation, but you do want to see this improve. So you want to see global liquidity start to head back up again. And the fact we've rejected off, you kind of expect it to chop around a bit on the way up, just like every time you get a bounce, there's a little relax and then it goes again. That's what you want to see. So another day of down on global liquidity could drag markets down a little bit further. If we break below this 50 EMA again, then and sort of have two closures below, I would say, then I'd be getting a little bit more worried that things are going to go further south. But for the time being, no panic there yet on global liquidity. Go to the Qs. So good bounce from the Qs off that trend line. Again, may get another update here. Still just in the bullish control zone. So not bad in that regard. Yeah, same thing on the mini futures. If we sort of hit this gap and sell off, then I would expect us to be going quite a bit lower, and this could be the 10% correction that we've been expecting. Just to go with a measurement. Actually, I have a feeling it could get as low as 15%, but and that's going to freak a lot of people out if it does. But yeah, 10% is going to be right on the daily 800 moving average. And a pretty key support level. So you got a peak here, you've got support here, you've got support here. You know, a lot of transactions in this area. That's a 10% move from the top there. Would make sense. Okay. Whether we go a bit deeper and freak people out, we'll have to wait and see. Oh, there is a gap there at 13%, 19,450, basically. Equal weight never really closed below that support level, so that's a good sign as well that we may keep going up a little bit first. But just some stage, we are going to get a decent sell-off out of this bullish momentum. I think that was sort of the shot across the bow the other day. And realistically, there was over 300 stocks that were going up when that happened. It was mainly led by Nvidia and the other AI related chip stocks and stuff. So realistically, once everyone settles down and realizes that it's probably not the end of the world, this DeepSeek, it is a shift. It's making these guys wake up and just realize that throwing billions of dollars at this thing isn't necessarily what they should be, their default position, I think. But I don't really think it's the end of the road yet. But we'll have to wait and see what happens when we get up and fill a lot of these gaps. So SPY obviously rejected off that trend line that we had. That was pretty good trend line. We break above that and confirm, then that will actually be quite bullish. Yeah, interestingly, the equal weight has actually dropped back a bit today on the S&P 500. That's a relatively bearish sign overall when you've got the SPY up nearly a whole percent. And again, that's probably, I haven't looked at it yet, but yeah, Nvidia's had a bounce. That's, I guess, pulling the rest of those numbers up, because the majority of the rest of them, I mean, Meta's having a good run. Meta's having a really good run, actually. 3 candles in a row above that trend line. That you may get a pullback into it, but that's a pretty bullish sign that Meta's actually planning on breaking out in a big way now. Okay, earnings is the problem here. So after the close on Wednesday, what you want to be careful of is a run up like this into earnings. Quite often will lead to a pullback at earnings. Like here, you've got to pull back into earnings and it jumps, and then just volatility is massive in there before it actually finalizes that direction. Earnings, this one here actually had a bit of a pullback, but a couple of days into earnings, it ramped and then Meta got flogged at that earnings. Earnings here, this is kind of the opposite, a little bit of pullback over the 2 to 3 days, and then it had a massive bump. So it's that last little pullback, those couple of days into earnings can give you a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. Again, little ramp up here and a pullback. So ramp up, I would expect a pullback now. How deep that goes will be interesting, and what that means for the overall market's going to be interesting, because if Meta shows a significant drop in ad revenue, or it's just getting belted in a sector that suggests overall weakness in the economy and a reduction in forward guidance, that could have a big impact across the board. So along with interest rate decisions this week and stuff like that, this one's going to be fairly critical, I think. Tesla's got earnings as well coming up, same time after ours. It's going to be a big day tomorrow. Tesla's potentially going to go the other way, though. It has pulled back into earnings. Momentum is squarely to the downside, though, so just be aware of that. No reason it can't turn around there, but BBWP is actually pretty close to a reset on Tesla as well. We don't often get much lower than that. Quite often your BBWP will reset from this sort of level. This is one where earnings, again, kind of just dragged up and then big sell off into earnings, or after earnings, sorry. Yeah, it's again another little sell off, little fake out into earnings and then pump. Kind of got something similar going on here, I think. If Tesla, again, it's the same thing. If Tesla gets flogged at earnings, it's going to be dropping at least into the 359 level. And at that point, I don't know whether it would hold that. But at this stage, I'd be leaning more towards a pump on Tesla for earnings than a drop. Despite the market, I think it's just hard to pick, but it's one to watch. Really good pullback on the Mag 7, like right back into this crossover, these trend lines. That's a pretty massive level, really good confluence there, and it's actually sort of continuing this run up now. And this is what I was sort of looking at. It's been a pretty big reset. Wiped out a lot of longs out of the system, and Wall Street would have been loving it. What I'm a little bit surprised about is if we go into sentiment index, the smart money is still not in the market yet. So this would suggest they didn't really buy the dip very much. Now, that may change today. There may be a little bump in this today. But the fact that they didn't come back into the market in a decent way when we had that drop is a little surprising and suggests there may be a bit more downside left yet. The other thing to be mindful of is some big dark pool transactions after these little rises in metals and mining. XLE, so energy, hasn't really got a bid yet. Financials, big trade right at the top here. Didn't make top 100, but nothing has in this area this month. But you would expect that to be a little bit of profit taking. And that's, I guess, a little bit concerning as well. A little bit of a bad omen for the market, I would say. Technology on the monthly, there was some sweeps down here around the lows, so that's kind of a good sign. There is some interest there. I'll just go to the last 7 days on that. So plenty of interest there down around the bottom. That may have been a buy there too. These are sweeps, so it's people just getting in big transactions. They want to get in as quick as possible. So it's not a bad sign to see this. And for the price to keep going up after that is a relatively good sign. So you would kind of expect it to come up and fill this gap at least. That's where things are going to get a little bit crazy, I think, once we fill those gaps, and we should be filling those gaps before sort of major news events come out, I think. XLY. So XLY is really flat this week. It did drop significantly when Nvidia dropped, but it's back up and kind of grinding up again still. So consumer discretionary is suggesting that the market's not panicking yet about the economy. And consumer staples has had a big trade right at the top here and has pulled back. So again, staples are coming back. Typically, the market isn't too concerned about the economy as a whole. So Marathon Digital got a bit of interest around here, but again, you'd expect that to have been a sell-off there. So no one's really coming in and buying this in a big way. Coinbase, in fact, we've gone sideways since that big trade, 30th largest ever. That's kind of, can't really say whether that was a buy or a sell yet. It could be a buy because they just missed the bottom here. But don't have a read on that. Yeah, this one here, good buy off the low for IBIT. It would seem like a buy off the low anyway. Intraday as well, so in the middle of the day, not at the end, but big transaction, ninth largest ever, right at the end of the day, and pretty flat today, like not a lot of volume coming through and quite choppy. So I wouldn't call this really decision made after this point yet. And I would be concerned that this is a bit of a take profit for someone that was in a lot earlier, a lot lower. Could be a buy, but we don't have confirmation of that yet. So Bitcoin, it's moved up. It's taking out a lot of the 100x shorters that are coming into the market. We haven't been able to get and really confirm above the 15-minute 800, which is the 1 hour 200 EMA. That's going to be a key level. If we can break above that, confirm above that, then I actually think we will go on a pretty decent run in February or even into the end of the month. At this stage, the amount of resistance that we're finding at that point, it's critical. At the same time, we're not really confirming below the 50 EMA on the 1 hour either, which is the 200 on the 15-minute. So kind of in no man's land, going sideways, waiting for the rest of the market to react. There was a pretty good bottoming signal here, so lots of red and 2 drops. So we like to see 2 drops, which is sort of a confirmation of that being a major bottom. And we have had a run up since then. So it's just whether or not that run up continues. CBD is up slightly from the lows over the last day. Open interest is kind of dropping off from the peaks down here though. So yeah, I'd like to see CBD really pick up again, but at this stage, to get that bounce, CBD just flattened off. It didn't even really spike back up. So the volume that was coming through for longs was still pretty evenly matched to the volume coming through in shorts. and it just ripped the shorters that were coming in here, and there were a lot of shorters. I was looking at the liquidation levels. Um, this is on the 1 week, obviously, but that's pretty good amount of shorters coming in here. So looking at the liquidation heat map, I wouldn't be surprised if Bitcoin sort of comes down into that. Sorry, that's ETH. Go back to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin back into the 99 to 100,000 sort of area would take out a lot of the longs that have come in the last couple of days. But yeah, there were a lot of shorts coming into the system on this drop. Obviously, nothing compared to this, but based on this, just looking at the 1 week, it wouldn't surprise me if we do actually go up. Looking at the 2 week, it actually looks a bit more attractive down below though. So that's why it's worthwhile zooming out. There's quite a bit of liquidity above and below here. So it may still push up to that 105 level. But I do kind of expect that to be considered a lower high as well. Bitcoin will have to get some serious interest to really push up and then break those levels into all-time highs, I think. Yeah, so zooming out again, yeah, there's still quite a bit here, but we get up into that 113, 114 level, and there's a fair bit up there. So kind of short time frames, it's going to be very choppy, I think, in the next week at least, into the end of the month. Where is it? So the 1 day is pretty even. Plenty of liquidations above and below. 7 day, there's a lot more to the upside. And pretty even on the 30 day. So maybe a sweep back down, put in a higher low, and then move up would probably surprise a lot of the market. Take out a lot of these shorters, drag some more shorters in. So move down, drag some more shorts in, and then rip them to the upside. Wouldn't surprise that much. The question is, does it want to go into this level, up into the 105s, take out a couple of billion worth of short liquidations, and then move into this area? 95s looks like a pretty key level. We've mentioned that previously as well. So that's sort of what I'm looking at. It was a good spot here if you're watching this graph. This was showing all the signs of a decent low. Yeah, lots of bids coming in. It's kind of quietened off today in this flat area. It's not a huge read either way there. But yeah, CBD on spot has actually increased a little. But no real movement in price. So have to see how that plays out. The future CBD is actually still trending down, looking at this. So yeah, Bitcoin's kind of a little bit like the rest of the market, but the rest of the market seems to be, it's potentially a short squeeze that's going on at the moment. yeah, I think everyone's kind of nervous for what's coming in terms of the news. Yeah, really. So let's have a look. Durable goods orders, yeah, that was way down. That's hilarious. So durable goods orders is massively down, despite the fact that they're talking tariffs. Um, so the price of durable goods and stuff should go up theoretically. Still, that's a big negative number, and it's more negative than the previous one even. And they were forecasting a positive number. I'm surprised that hasn't knocked markets around a bit more than what it has. Um, Tomorrow we got the interest rate decision around an hour, like 23 hours from now. That's going to be a big one. I got a funny feeling they're going to cut it, actually. GDP growth. Yeah. As I said the other day, I have a feeling they're going to take the opportunity to cut before they get a GDP growth number that's actually above forecast. That'd be an interesting one to play out. And then they got all this spending data coming out after the decision as well. So I think that could be by design. Core PC is going to be an interesting one too. Yeah, I think the market wants a cut. It's whether or not they deliver it. If it stays flat, I think the market will actually pull back. That'll be the trigger. So yeah, a bit more up, close this gap, and then it's basically a news event thing, which it's I mean it's still postured to the bullish side, but after what happened yesterday, just on the everyone's blaming the DeepSeek AI stuff. I don't know about that. Yeah, markets are at a bit of a crossroads at the moment. Surprised IWM hasn't come up a little bit more actually, which suggests the market is a bit nervous about the smaller cap stocks, which would suggest that market's a little bit more concerned about the economy overall, because these will typically struggle if the economy is up the shit. And the fact we haven't had a big run up on these normally do well with a new president coming in, because tax cuts and money pumping into the system and stuff like that. Normally your lower cap will actually do okay, and they're at a good point here. This could be a sort of a basing pattern, reconfirmation of this level, and then a move away would actually make a lot of sense. We do have a lot of vectors above here to be reclaimed. So that's a sign that things may be more positive than not, but it's also momentum's starting to tick to the downside. And you don't often get a tick below the signal line and then a bump back up on IWM. We haven't had one of those in the bullish control zone for quite a while. Back in May 24. And it didn't lead to that much of a run up either. Okay. Just be aware of that. What you're hoping for really is this sort of thing here. It might tick below, but then it comes back up and goes on a big run. I don't see that happening to that degree, but could be wrong. XLI, so industrials pull back a little as well. After a good run up, and coming off big BBWP read. In certain sectors, this looks like the top of the cycle. XLY, XLP's had a decent bounce. But again, it looks like it's kind of rolling over. So that would suggest more downside potential on markets. Oh, the other interesting one. So XLP versus SPY did the other day did break above that trend line, which typically when we're breaking trend lines to the upside, that's a signal that the market's coming down. Now, today, if it closes here in an hour, that would be a reclamation to the downside of that trend line and would suggest that there's potential for the market to go further up. It's something worth watching pretty closely, I think. The equal weight version of that didn't actually confirm any trend line breaks. So this is probably the one I'm going to watch a little bit more closely, the equal weight. At this stage, there's nothing to panic about on that. But certainly that was a decent bounce, so we've got to be a little bit mindful of it. Equal weight, XLY, XLP is still showing a bit of bullishness there. So overall, a lot of the signals are that the market doesn't really have an issue at the moment. I'd love to see regional banking above this line to really say that, yeah, okay, the economy's fine and there's happy days. But this stage, it looks like it actually might roll over here. It's reclaimed basically these vectors here. There is a nice wick up to the top here, but yeah, a lot of these indicators are kind of at critical levels at the moment. ITP looks like it's struggling to get through some of the key moving averages here. That's not ideal. Funnily enough, it's done something close to that move in a few weeks. Home builders, same sort of deal. Recovered this vector. It's not really much for it to go back into. Rejected off a fairly strong resistance level there. Just whether or not it can sort of consolidate here for a little bit and then move back up to the upside. Semis, good bounce off the 800 EMA, but yeah, look, every time it's come down and sort of done something similar to that, it has continued back to the upside. So I have to wait and see on that one. The 800 has been a pretty good level. The semis may actually recover here. DJI gold. See, this is an indicator that's suggesting not a huge issue at the moment. It's pulling back into some moving averages, having a rest after a pretty big day. DJT gold, and still finding a little bit of a base. Struggling to get through the 200 EMA, which is not ideal, but yeah, if we can break, like it is sort of bottoming off. Break above that 200 with confirmation, and that would be a lot better for the economy. It would suggest that transport is going well comparative to gold. It's kind of what you want. But at this stage, it's not confirmed. It's still relatively bearish. It has had a good run up, DJT, but just not as much as gold. Dow Jones is getting close to its all-time high as well. Yeah, BBWP is pretty high on this one. So is momentum. And pretty good setup for a pullback. VIX has had a decent drop today, back below this trend line. And it's like, this is a sign that that blip was potentially just a freak out of the markets, and once the emotions calm down, it just heads back to the upside. But the market is very reactionary at the moment. The skew yesterday was heading down quite sharply. I'm surprised that today there's kind of a general upside momentum on S&P 500 now. The RSP has pulled back, but the normal S&P 500 has not. So I think today's skew reading will be important. If it has jumped back up, then I think that will signal that the market is okay to keep going up. If it's still pulling back after the market has had an up day, then probably going to keep coming back. Now, there was a hell of a lot of puts that were put into the market yesterday, which I think the market's going to try and stay there until expiration of those options. It's not going to want to pay them out. And if it goes into negative gamma, then it could be a pretty massive sell-off. But technically it was in negative gamma at the close, I think, yesterday, but it looks like they're trying to avoid paying those options out. Again, this sort of rejection of this level on the 1-day VIX, that is a pretty good sign for the bulls. If that continues back to the downside again, then that would suggest that yesterday's low was sort of a local low. Pretty decent low. German market is still wanting to go to the upside. Chinese market is just grinding ever so slowly to the upside. Again, it's a little surprising given the amount of financial hurt that China is in at the moment. This is a good sign though on the UK market. So it's pulled back, didn't quite hit the level that I would have been happier with, but it's pulled back into a key level here and found quite a bit of buying support. So that's not a bad sign for the UK market either. If it gets above these levels here on the daily closure, so 85.75, then that would suggest further upside. And in general, if markets around the world are going to keep going up, you would expect the US market to do the same. Treasuries still grinding to the upside a bit. Needs a bit more momentum to the upside. Its stochastic momentum is up. BBWP is up, so that's a pretty good sign as well that bonds should tick further to the upside. Now, that'll if the interest rate decision comes in and they actually reduce interest rates, then I would expect these to go up. Bonds, yeah, so high yield jump again. If there was a massive issue in the markets, you would expect these to be dropping off, and they just didn't. They barely even reacted to the big drop the other day. So all this is suggesting that the markets don't have an issue with what's going on with Nvidia and that big drop. It's just like it was a clean out of some retail long. The only thing is that the sentiment index, the smart money index, is quite low still. Be interesting to see what the read is today. Because yeah, none of these indicators are really telling me there's a big issue. In fact, the 2 years broken this trend line, and pretty well, I would almost consider that a retest as well. Below the 200 EMA, below all the key moving averages. The 2 years right for further downside, to be honest. 10 years, not quite there yet, but 10 years staying high and the 2 year dropping is, again, a signal that we're potentially getting close to the end of the cycle, end of the bull cycle. Chinese 10 year and 2 year still aren't looking great. The 2 years actually running a little bit harder than the 10 year for the Chinese market. Copper looks like it wants to find some support here. Lots of key moving averages, pretty good support level. If that continues to the upside as well, or turns to the upside on increasing BBWP, then I would suggest copper's going to $4.70, and the economy would be looking, or the markets would be looking okay. Like that'd be a pretty big breakout of that trend line there, which would tie in with our sort of next couple of months 15% up on S&P 500. It's just the market's in an indecision area at the moment. Gold, big volume pullback on gold, but finding some support here today. A little concerning that momentum is so far the downside, but gold can turn that around pretty quick. It's kind of in a little bit of no man's land. It did tag the right up near the tip of that vector candle. So, okay, vector candle recovery. If we get a closure above this, like a daily closure above these candles the last 2 days, then I would actually expect gold to at least come up into the 2800s and at least tag this midline. Doesn't have to, but that would make a lot of sense if it did. It should find some support around 27.15. If it comes back some more, yeah, I don't think there's any reason to close my gold positions. US oil finding some support at the moment. You would expect some support around here. It may come back into the value area high. At this stage, though, it's kind of toying with a lot of different trend lines. So hard, another hard read on gold. Sorry, on oil. At this stage, you would expect upside to be a little bit more likely, just because momentum's starting to change direction. But given that momentum is still pointing down and BBWP's just crossed above the signal line, we could actually get a bit of a flush on oil down into point of control and value area high. So no real confirmation there either way. I would suggest, a closure back above 74.60 would suggest a decent upside move on oil. Closure below 72.90, even 72.70, and downside is more likely. Dixie, a little bit of an update on Dixie. Bit of a bounce off pretty reasonable support level, actually. Don't expect it to really climb too high. It's just moving back into the 50 EMA at the moment. If Dixie breaks above 108 again, then it could actually go on a pretty big run. We have had 3 legs up though, so typically after a move like this, button. After a move where you got 3 significant legs up, then you would expect the downside to start. So I still think Dixie's coming into at least 103.5 over the next month or so, which would be a good sign for February as being a bullish month. Sorry, putting myself to sleep. Japanese yen hasn't really moved up that much either. Not a big read there. Aussie dollar's pulling back. That's not a good setup for the Aussie dollar. The Aussie dollar could break into 50s, which it hasn't done in quite a while. Business confidence was down, but not as bad as the last time. Inflation rate. Euro. It's pulling back from a pretty highly traded zone and decent resistance level. It's not looking great. Like the Dixie, there is a chance that the Dixie will actually break back above that 108, which will drag on markets. The Brazilian dollar's going okay against the US. Hong Kong dollar isn't faring too well. US is strong against that. Great Britain pound is coming into resistance as well. That British pound, though, is kind of confirming a breakout of a trend line there too. So the pound starts moving up. That could suggest the Dixie will keep going to the downside. All right, percentage of stocks above the 50-day moving average has come back a little bit today. And this is a pretty key level for it too. So it's been a support level and a resistance level throughout history. It's sitting right smack bang in the middle. I guess no real read there, but the fact that momentum's pretty high to the upside wouldn't surprise if it does come back down a bit. So yeah, there's a lot of earnings are going to be pretty critical for some of these guys. Nvidia is probably going to chop in this area until earnings, potentially even just chop into the 130 and potentially down to sort of 114. That's going to be, there is some very interesting levels on Nvidia. We've reclaimed this one, so that's going to be key. Funny that we smashed straight into the point of control and bounced off it. It's just where it can clear that value area high now. Google's fared a bit better than Nvidia, that's for sure. Yeah. Google's an interesting one though, because I've been hearing rumors that they've actually turned off the their quantum computer, the Willow chip. They were getting some really weird readings out of it. They were looking like hieroglyph kind of patterns and all sorts of weird stuff in the data. It's like the data was sort of arranging itself in ways they did not expect. But the rumor is that they got some hackers involved in trying to analyze it, and it suggests that there's potential attack vectors in there that can't be plugged, that are just inherent in the way quantum computing works. So all sorts of rumors and stuff going around at the moment. So Google's an interesting one. This pump was all related to Willow, and don't know that either the issues aren't actually there or the market hasn't digested them yet. And given the drop in all the AI stuff, it's holding pretty well at the moment. So earnings might be another key one for Google. RK, this suggests a bit of risk on. Not a huge drop in RK. Breaking back above that channel midline, which probably isn't very well drawn, but we should move this. Yeah. RK could still keep going, which would suggest risk on and the markets to keep going up. It's not a super fantastic indicator though. Good recovery of this level here from Apple. Apple was pretty heavily sold off. Now we have recovered this vector though as well. I would expect Apple to find some resistance up around the 247, 248 mark. But the fact we're running up into earnings is not a great, like if we're hitting this trend line into earnings, then I'd be probably expecting a sell-off in Apple. I don't know how their earnings would be, and their projected earnings would be that great, to be honest. Yeah. Triple M, holy shit. This is a stock I wouldn't expect to be doing this if the market was planning on going down a lot. Earnings are good. So yeah, I would say that's a bullish sign for markets overall. Amazon, it's got a pretty critical trend line in there. Looks like it wants to hit that going into earnings as well. You'd have to be expecting Amazon to sell off on earnings. If it doesn't, if Amazon smashes it, then this will suggest that the market's going into a pretty decent blow off top. Yeah, we already covered Meta. Airbnb is kind of not looking great, but it's still trying pretty hard. Like this could be one big bull flag on Airbnb. Really needs to break this trend line though, somewhere in there. It's trying. AMD. Yeah. AVGO got hammered. That's a island reversal there too. Typically that would lead to more downside. And you would expect it to come into at least 183. 184, 183. I don't think semis are out of the woods yet. There's signs that there's more downside to come on semis, which could drag the market down. ASML. Yeah, that earnings at the open tomorrow. TSM. Man, these guys wiped some decent percentages off. I would have wiped out a lot of retail longs there, I would suggest. Yeah, another island reversal too. How the car guys going, struggling. They're just not making new highs. That is overall bearish on the economy, not necessarily markets, but at least the economy. Markets will catch up to the economy eventually. It's interesting. Markets kind of are ahead of earnings. They go off projected earnings, but the economy is kind of ahead of projected earnings in a way. So markets react slowly to overall economic factors because of that. It's kind of a weird setup. That's why if you look at the economy, you'll end up shorting the markets too early. But it's good to know when you're likely to be in a volatile time. So total crypto market cap's still heading down. That's not a great sign. So USDT is kind of confirming above this trend line as well. So it's all stable. Well, the bigger stable coins versus BTC back above this trend line. That suggests if we stay above that, BTC is going to keep coming down. What we don't want to see is this BBWP really tick into the upside while momentum is still to the upside on stablecoins, that would be a little bit concerning. These guys are backing ETH versus BTC longs. I don't know what they're seeing. People are starting to long ETH, also shorting ETH. So still some interest in picking up BTC. Not as much as there has been, but it's suggesting there might be a little bit of upside left in BTC. Shorts are starting to get a bit more interest as well, though. Volatility's down. Actually, not a bad sign. Yeah, ETH versus BTC looks like it's going to break down though. Like, seriously, you're long and ETH versus BTC here. Yeah, maybe. I just this chart does not look great. Does not look great at all. ETH dominance is breaking new lows as well. Oh, that's new all-time. Retesting a pretty key level here for ETH dominance, and it looks like it does not want to stop. BTC dominance, on the other hand, is pushing back up. We could get back up to 70% on BTC just because there's the amount of liquidity that's in the market for everything else is just doesn't seem to be there. Ethereum bouncing off the value area low is a good sign on the weekly. Daily looking a bit more nasty, closing 3.5 hours. Closure above the 800 EMA would be a bit nicer, but at this stage, that's a fair bit of momentum to the downside. What you don't want to see if you're an ETH bull is closures below this value area low with momentum to the downside with BBWP increasing off a pretty low base. That would suggest ETH would be coming back into the 2.5 sort of area. It'll probably stop for a rest at 2600 ish, but I would expect it to slip through pretty quick. And that'll put a dent in a lot of the alts as well because it'll just drag liquidity out of the market. So yeah, CME is kind of closing in an hour 20. It's holding. Retest of the 20 EMA. Rejection off it isn't great. You'd probably expect at least 100K over the next day. Whether it bounces off there, we'll have to wait and see. But at the same time, momentum's back out of the bullish control zone on the daily for CME. There's not a lot for CME to really suggest that we're going back up. Certainly, same thing, good bounce off this level, but it looks like downside is more likely. It's just whether we break below this wick here and come back down into the 90s and 80s. 85 looks like a reasonable level as well. 95 is going to be a key level on the way down, from what I can tell. If we come back down, there is a fair bit of liquidity there, but also we've got the 200 EMA on CME. And 96.5 is the point of control. But yeah, this little corner in here for Bitcoin was an interesting one, because literally the day before we had the big drop, I had a circle in here saying that that would be a pretty good buying opportunity, I would think. We hit that level, it just happened a few days late. So on the rest of the market, to the rest of the exchanges, Bitcoin has actually tested both the 20 and the 50 today. And it's looking a little bearish, to be honest. Closure below this trend line would be critical. It would suggest we're going to keep going. There is a 200 EMA there at 98. So, and it did bounce off basically the 200 EMA, as well as the top of this channel. So we've still got a lot of support in this area. Point of control is relatively high, so 96,700. You'd still be expecting a bit of a bounce from here. And if we do bounce from this level, or even from where we're at now, you'd kind of expect Bitcoin to go on a pretty decent run. But yeah, this area in here, potentially down a little bit further into point of control, that's going to be critical for support. If we can bounce off that, then you're putting in a higher low, and BBWP will be pretty well reset. There is actually a bit of a trend line happening on momentum here as well. So if we shifted momentum in the next day to the upside, that'd be a pretty decent trend line to be doing that off. And I would suggest that we will go on a pretty good run into February. So yeah, the 5-day is still looking bullish. So worthwhile keeping that in mind. Still got two days before it closes, but relatively bullish. The 2-day, on the other hand, looks like it's potentially going to pull back a little bit, which could potentially pull back the 5-day into a pretty negative setup. So this week is pretty critical. Watch those key levels. 100K is going to be like 99 to 100K on the way back down. If we come back down, is going to be key, just because we got this trend line here. And then if we start failing that trend line, then yeah, it should pull back quite a bit more. Total crypto market cap's got a little bit of support here if it wants it off one of the pivots. I just wanted to check BTC on that. So this is the 4-hourly chart. 4-hourly chart is looking relatively bearish, I would say here. Putting in a lower high potentially, with quite a few vector candles below. Cyclic RSI is tending to the downside. Momentum on that is to the downside as well. Potentially going to get a pullback into these pivots at least, I would say, into that 99,500. So again, that's key sort of level. And then yeah, your 95.5 is this bottom pivot here, which is actually fairly strong resistance zone previously. So it could be a pretty decent support. So bull market isn't necessarily over yet. We got some key support levels below. We'll just have to wait and see how it reacts off them. But I would expect a little bounce off 99.5. If we clear back above these levels here on the 4-hour, 102,800, say, then I'd expect it to at least come back up and retest this trend line again, which should be pretty close to all-time highs. In which case you would actually be quite bullish on Bitcoin, typically. Melania and Trump still in struggle town. Sol, similar to Bitcoin, really. It's got some key levels, 210. Just going to do Litecoin a little bit. I think Ondo announced a reasonable partnership with someone recently. May cause them to float up. A lot of the AI stocks are getting flogged, which I guess shouldn't surprise too much. XRP is still looking pretty strong compared to a lot of the others. If we reject and break down from here, that's not ideal. There's no real vectors to come back up into here either. So on the 4-hour, that's a little concerning. So yeah, I'd actually expect XRP to come back down and retest at least that $2.70, which does it stop there? I have to wait and see, but it is fairly oversold on the 4-hour cyclic RSI. That's a good positive sign for it. Just have to wait and see what happens around this area. Well, Pengu got flogged. Wow. Glad I sold that when I did. I don't know that this will keep going much further, but wow. 0.4 cents would be an interesting level for it. That would suggest the rest of the market's going to come back pretty hard. Litecoin rejected that pivot there. I kind of expect LTC to come back a bit further as well. It wouldn't be a bad level for a lot of these things to reset back down around the low from 13th of Jan. Don't know whether it'd stop there though. It's the only issue. Just need to confirm a direction at the moment, and at this stage, downside looks more likely on a lot of these. Yeah, Litecoin's looking like a bit of momentum to the downside. 91 will be a critical level for Litecoin. I mean, right now is a critical level for Litecoin. 110, that 200 EMA could provide some support. Yeah, it's just, this is lower low. Simple as it gets. That's a lower low. Momentum's to the downside. BBWP is actually starting to increase. So 91 as a target for Litecoin is actually quite plausible. Yeah, the rest of the market's still getting hammered. This won't be a great close for Brett, I wouldn't think, if it closes below these candles here, which is low 7.5 cents. Yeah. Overall, looking pretty negative. Bitcoin needs to be the one to turn around to really drag these things up, and it's, as we speak, it looks like it's actually dropping on the shorter time frames. Yeah. That's a retest of the 50 and the 200 there and move to the downside. Where's the target on this? Whoa. Okay, the target, you might get a little bit of support around 101, 200. Just looking at vector candles alone. What the hell is that? Just looking at vector candles. Yeah, the target's 97.5. There's not a lot. Everything else has been recovered. So Bitcoin's going to have to find some serious support in an area that doesn't really seem to have much liquidity at. Yeah, 100K, yeah, maybe. That'd be the first standard deviation away from the mean at the moment. So not a bad level. But yeah, that's not a great sign. Moving away with momentum. The only saving grace for this move right now is that volatility is contracting a little bit. But if we keep moving down with force, that's going to change anyway. Potential turnaround at 100,800, but yeah, I don't see that as being the level. I would, yeah. I guess it would kind of make sense. It would soak up a fair bit of liquidity to the downside. Like 100,300 would be a pretty decent level. Just that stage, the momentum to the downside would seem like it would be too great. We'd have to see some pretty massive turnaround happening. Yeah, 100,900, 100,800. Bit of interest there. Another level would be around that 100,200, 100,300. That would get rid of a lot of the longs that have come into the market since this little pump, and put in a higher low, and it would retest that trend line that we've broken above. So there's the best case for the bulls, I think, if we come in and bounce either at just under 101,000 or just above 100,000. If we bounce from there, then that could actually be a pretty good sign for the bulls. It would sort of bring us into this trend line here. So a closure somewhere in or just below the 50 EMA on today, and then a closure tomorrow above that 100,000 level would be relatively bullish. But in the meantime, it looks like it wants to go a bit lower. Some critical days ahead for Bitcoin and the stock market in general. Sorry, that's gone for freaking ages, but there was a lot to look at today. My general bias is to the downside, and yeah, I'll just be watching closely for these levels around that 100,000, 101, 100,000, those sort of levels. For the time being, generally bearish. Just keep an eye on earnings that are coming out after the close today.